All right, folks. So my name is JJ Antiquino. I am a partner technology strategist with Microsoft, and I'm part of the partner team unit dedicated to tech data. So along with Maritza Reyes and Johnny Schurenberg, to help lead the technological strategy for tech data and the Microsoft relationship. This call is really important to us because we are on the cusp of launching Microsoft Azure through Open. And actually, we don't have a lot of content on the Azure and Open piece until we get towards the end of this presentation. There's going to be more forthcoming here as we launch or get closer to launch with WPC coming up and the actual availability on the price list on August 1st. So look for that to come soon, but please make sure that you are having conversations with your tech data sales reps and your Microsoft team at Tech Data. All right, so just to kick this off, I like this slide a lot because it kind of exemplifies where we've come with Microsoft Azure and Windows Azure, and the fact that over 100 million fans visited Sochi2014.com during the Olympics. So if you ever went to that website, you were one of over 100 million fans that visited that site, and it was powered by Microsoft Azure. That meant over 6,000 hours of streamed high-def video and over 2.1 million streamed the Team USA versus Canada hockey game live. So that's pretty amazing in terms of the scale that we're able to bring. And so the reason why I put up this slide is just to let you know that Azure is definitely enterprise ready. And if it's enterprise ready and the fact that it can scale to a small and medium business, being able to offer everything that we can with Microsoft Azure is pretty impressive, even to small customers that only need one server hosted in the cloud, right? So let's go ahead and move forward here and talk a little bit about why exactly the cloud. If you are selling the cloud already, you know all the reasons that are on the screen right now as to why someone might want to purchase the cloud. And with Azure, there's no exception here, right? You're going to be able to reduce capital expense. It's going to give you that fast time to market. It's elastic scale, which I'll go into more detail in the next slide. But it's also about having that global availability. And that's why it's important for me to make note of the fact that, again, Sochi2014.com, although it was something available to enterprises and people all over the country and 100 million people, even a small business may need that elastic scale, and a small business may need that global availability depending on how they've set up their business. If they've got an office, in South America or North America or in Europe, how are they going to be able to accommodate their employees and their users? With the cloud and Azure, this is something completely different than trying to sell someone an Office 365 agreement, because with Office 365, it's very simple. You count up the number of users that you have, and then you decide on the plan that you want, and there you go. There's the price. With the cloud here and with Azure, you're truly using consumption-based billing, meaning you're only paying for what you're actually using in the cloud. It also makes things a little bit more complicated, but I think that we have a solution going forward with Azure in Open. So with Microsoft, you are in complete control of how you want to deploy, and this is what also again separates us from some of the other cloud vendors out there. Not only do we have control of developing the platform, Windows Server, that that everyone runs on these days from an enterprise and SMB standpoint, but with Microsoft Azure, you have the decision to make whether or not you want to run everything inside the cloud, whether or not you want to have physical servers on premises, and whether or not you want to sync them all and have them work together. So I'll show you a slide as to where some of our partners are using Microsoft Azure hand in hand with their on-premises solutions and being very successful at implementing those for their customers. So on to this next slide about why someone might want to use Azure as opposed to having an on-premises server. It's all about cloud computing patterns and scenarios. What you see here are some perfect opportunities to have Azure running in your environment or as part of your environment. For example, when you've got that on and off type of situation. And this is going to be, for example, where maybe you have a line of business application that runs only every Friday. It does a batch job every Friday or Saturday evening or something like that. So while no one's at work, you need to use that computing power. Imagine if that took 5-10 servers in order to run that batch job. If you were in an on-premises world, you would have to physically have on-premises 5 or 10 servers running on Friday and Saturday night. But let's say they weren't running any other days of the week. Then you have all those servers just sitting there doing nothing. Whereas with Azure and cloud computing, you only turn it on and you only use and pay for the days that are going to be batch processing, such as Friday and Saturday. Azure is also a great way for you to think about companies that are growing fast. Maybe they're a small business, but they're thinking, hey, you know what? I see the future for our business, and I don't know how fast we're going to grow, but we're growing pretty fast right now. Do we need to make the investment in all these on-premises servers up front where we don't know and there's some uncertainty moving forward? Well, again, with Azure, you have the ability to help grow faster with things like offsite backups. As your data storage needs increase, you can scale up very quickly with Azure. If you're trying to do any piloting or production type application rollouts and you're deciding how fast you need to scale, you can take your time and also piecemeal them out with Azure. Azure is also great for unpredictable demand and also predictable bursting. There are some scenarios where, let's say you are running a business and it takes 5 servers to run your business and everything's running smoothly, but you're at capacity, and then you get a huge order that comes in and it requires 2 or 3 more other servers and you need them right then and there. Again, in a physical world, you would have to go out and procure the servers, licenses, install them, get everything up to speed, and that could take days, if not weeks, right? With Azure, you just quickly provision a new server and you're up and running. Same thing goes with predictable bursting. Let's say we have a scenario where cyclically that during the Christmas season and during back to school season, or maybe during special holidays like Valentine's Day, you're going to have a spike in terms of sales or in terms of activity. Again, perfect way to use the cloud, because you know that during those peak times I'll have the server needs that I require, and then I can just shut them off, as opposed to paying for these servers that are not going to be used half of the year. All right, so that's just kind of a good way to think about cloud computing in general. But why exactly might we want to think about Microsoft? Well, with Microsoft, we offer a compelling competitive differentiator for our customers because, again, as I mentioned earlier, we are that single vendor across clouds, both private, public, and hoster, if you're doing something like SPLA. We're also that single point of support for infrastructure, OS, services, and applications. So when you think about applications running in a cloud-based environment, because if you do it on Microsoft Azure, we control all the support, and we're the ones that actually developed the applications and the server OS. We know how best to have it run in a cloud-based environment. So we're going to be that single point of support for you there. We also have tenured experience and enterprise credibility. You already know how crucial Windows servers are to your customers today, and we've taken that forward with more experience in the cloud with our servers running across the globe. When you think about the single vendor for infrastructure as a service as well as platform as a service, which I'll get into in just a little bit, again, Microsoft is a great choice here, because you may not want to just do virtual machines or infrastructure in the cloud. Perhaps you just want to take your database in the cloud with SQL. We can help you there. If you're trying to do websites in the cloud, we can help you there, and we've got a great platform to do it with Microsoft Azure. And finally, when it comes to actual application servers, such as SharePoint and SQL, we've developed them, as I mentioned earlier, with Azure in mind. So whenever someone creates or modifies or upgrades code for their server products here in the business groups at Microsoft, they're doing it with the whole intention of making it compatible with Microsoft Azure as opposed to some of the other cloud platforms out there. Of course, you're going to be able to run successfully, as we know, with some of the other vendors out there, but again, our developers have Azure in mind first. So let's talk a little bit about what Microsoft Azure has to offer. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really about infrastructure as a service and also platform as a service. When you think about things like Office 365, Windows Intune, CRM Online, we consider those mainly as software as a service type environments. That's where you as a partner don't really need to do any heavy duty development or configuration. You may help get everything created correctly for your customers in terms of setting up user accounts, setting up mailboxes correctly, making sure that they're installed properly on site and have Office delivered to each desktop. But you're not doing any actual configuration of servers. You're not thinking about the underlying infrastructure, because you're just basically using software as a service, right? But with infrastructure as a service through Microsoft Azure, here's where things get a little bit trickier, right? Because here, you as the partner or as the customer are going to be the one taking care of all the applications, all the data, all the runtime middleware, and most importantly, the operating system that everything is going to be running on. Microsoft, on our end, will be taking care of the virtualization layer, which is Hyper-V, our servers, physical servers, physical storage, as well as a networking piece. You are just able to do whatever you want because you're taking care of the OS with infrastructure as a service. So an example of this right here on Microsoft Azure would be say, hey, you know what? I want to spin up a Windows Server 2012 R2 in the cloud, and I'm going to use that as an infrastructure as a service environment. So if I want to extend my current on-premises environment, if I want to do things like remote desktop in the cloud, I can do that with infrastructure as a service. If I want to run a line of business application on my own virtual machine running inside of Microsoft Azure, I can do that again with Microsoft Azure as that infrastructure as a service provider. There's some great things that come along with infrastructure as a service because you are the one that installed the OS and configured the OS. You get to do whatever you want to that OS. It's your own server, just like it would be on premises. But at the same time, because you do own that server, you are responsible for all the correct patching of that server. You need to make sure that server is up to date. You need to make sure that all the antivirus pieces that you might want on that server are also configured and kept up to date. Again, it's almost like having an on-premises server, just something hosted by Microsoft through Azure. To bridge the gap between software as a service and infrastructure as a service, of course, we've got platform as a service. Here, you, as the partner or customer, you don't care about the operating system. You don't really care that it's running Windows Server 2012 and it has these specific updates or has these antivirus updates on there because Microsoft at that point is taking care of the operating system environment. You, for your part, are there to build upon specific applications and data. So a perfect example of this would be SQL Azure. Instead of creating my own virtual machine and my own operating system running Microsoft Windows Server 2012 and then installing SQL Server on top of the OS and then managing all of that, instead I can just have my SQL database in the cloud and then just access it directly through Azure. So it's kind of the differentiator between infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. But let me give you some more detail in terms of where we see Microsoft Azure being a good play for small businesses that want to have that global presence. Because of course we've got global data centers across the globe, and here's some pictures and examples of what they kind of look like. But at the same time, we also have global support. So if you have a location that needs to speak to someone in Spanish, or you're in Europe and you need to speak to someone in French, you can do that because Microsoft Azure has those support centers as well as the combined experience to go across that. We have 24/7, 365 support, and we are supporting over 1 billion customers and 20 million businesses on Microsoft Azure today. We've got local account teams to help you, help you get through this if you are a global, global partner, and also we can have your customers pay in their local currencies depending on how you're procuring or selling Azure to them. So when we take a look at our key Microsoft Azure sales scenarios, especially in our space, we like to say that the first rule of Azure is don't sell Azure. I mean, if you go to a customer and tell them, hey, you know what, I want to sell you Azure, Azure is made up of so many different things that they're probably going to have no idea what you're talking about or what you really are trying to sell them. And so when we like to talk about Azure, it's similar to thinking about, about baking a cake, right? So when you bake a cake, you've got multiple ingredients. There are so many things that you can put into a cake to make it taste different. You can make a chocolate cake or a strawberry cake or a vanilla cake. And those are all the different components of Azure. The resulting cake is basically the solution that you'll be able to provide the customer, and you can make it taste or make it appear or give them what they actually need in a final form. So this slide right here kind of exemplifies what Azure is and gives you a description of it. And again, remember, like I said, I mean, if you're trying to tell customers, hey, buy some Azure from me, and you give them this this description up here, they're probably going to be pretty confused. So Microsoft's definition of Microsoft Azure is that it is an open and flexible cloud platform that enables you to quickly build, deploy, and manage solutions across a global network of Microsoft managed data centers. And so what you can take a look at here is that Microsoft Azure allows you to build upon many usage-based services. So the first one's up top in gray right there, the app services that talk about caching, identity, service bus, media, content delivery network, integration, high-performance computing, and analytics. Those things are probably going to be more platform as a service and also more developer-focused. So if I'm trying to build a mobile app and I want to have a cloud-based provider be the backbone of that mobile app, Azure is going to be a good choice for me, and those app services up there are going to really make that app shine. For most of us in SMB, or for most of us when we think about Azure, it's more of an infrastructure as a service and platform as a service play from a database standpoint, and that's kind of what we're showing you in the bottom three areas, such as compute, storage, and network. So if I want to create that infrastructure as a service and I want to have a virtual machine in the cloud, I can bring my own virtual machine, or I can use a catalog of virtual machines that Microsoft has already given to us inside of Azure. So that ranges from, for example, Windows servers all the way through some other Linux operating systems that we have hosted in our catalog. If you want to create your own websites and you're using a current website provider, or maybe you're even still creating your own IaaS servers and exposing them to the cloud instead, use Microsoft Azure as your platform for the cloud. We've got many other cloud services you can use. Again, from a storage standpoint, Microsoft Azure in a number of different ways. We have built Windows Server 2012 R2 to back up directly to Azure, and when you do that, it's that one-click option. It's integrated into the server platform already. It's something that if your customer doesn't currently have a backup solution, this is one way to get them in the cloud, and very simply with Microsoft Azure. And at that point right there, you're only really charged for the storage. We've also got blob storage, which a lot of our third-party partners, so third-party vendors, are actually using as their storage backbone. So when you think about, if you take a look at some of your storage partners today that are having backup solutions in the cloud, ask them where are they actually backing up their data, and some of them may actually tell you that Microsoft Azure is where they're storing their data. They're just creating the interface on the front end to make that happen. From a networking standpoint, again, I mentioned, if you want to be able to do infrastructure as a service in the cloud, but also still have an on-premises environment, and you need to be able to sync those both through a VPN network, or through a VPN or site-to-site VPN. You can do that with Microsoft Azure. And so beyond what I've just been telling you, we've asked a lot of partners how are they using Microsoft Azure today, and some of the things that they've told us is that they are, for example, using RDP to create custom apps in Azure. They're doing group policy in Azure. They're doing directory synchronization in Azure. They're also doing Active Directory Federation services and single sign-on through Azure VM. So if you have an Office 365 environment and you've been thinking about doing Active Directory Federation but don't want to set up that separate server, people are hosting that in Azure. They're also doing domain controllers extended to Azure. If you have that remote site and there are no servers locally, or all those users are working from home but you want them to authenticate directly to Microsoft Azure instead of having to set up a server locally in some remote office, you can do that with Microsoft Azure. Of course, you have to set up things like site to site and point to site VPN and things like that, but it is possible to do with Azure. As I mentioned earlier, doing Azure for backup for all your Windows servers, VMs, doing backup for SQL, for SharePoint, and you might also be using Azure for cloud service authentication portals. You may have seen some of those single sign-on companies out there who are saying, if there's just one portal you need to sign on to, and when you sign on to that portal, all you've got to do is click on the icon for the app or the cloud service you want to get to, and you don't have to even remember how to put in a username and password because it all is a single sign-on capability through that portal. Microsoft Azure does that as well, and we have a free version that you can try out and get going for your customers. We've actually teamed up with thousands of partners to create a really huge portal for that. But what we've found for the SMB space specifically is that we think that going forward that there are going to be some key Azure scenarios, and I've already kind of mentioned them. I just wanted to bring them up on a single slide and highlight what they are. And that is to say that we believe that Azure for the SMB is going to think about data backup in the cloud. They're going to think about deploying applications within VM. So beyond just Active Directory or domain controllers in the cloud, instead of creating that brand new application and doing it on some legacy server, they're going to create a virtual machine and do that in the cloud. And finally, hosting websites is again where we see a lot of our SMB customers think about moving into Microsoft Azure. So now that I've kind of given you an idea of what Azure is looking like for us, I want to talk about transacting Microsoft Azure. And this is kind of why we wanted to do this presentation today, because I could spend hours just talking about each of these individual components. But what we really are excited about is the fact that there is a way to transact this through Tech Data coming on August 1st. But before we get started, I really kind of need to tell you where we are, if you don't know, and where we've kind of come from. First of all, This is truly consumption-based billing, right? And so you're only paying for what you actually use. The best place to find out how much or potentially how much this might cost would be to go to azure.microsoft.com, and then there'd be a link for pricing. You could drop that down and select the calculator. On this slide deck, which you'll be able to get access to after our presentation as well, you would be able to see that link and click on it. But in the screenshot, if you can actually see it, there's an example right there of a virtual machine cost right there of a small VM that that has I can't even read that right now, like about 1.75 gigs worth of RAM and a single processor right there, and it would cost $55.80 per month if that machine was running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But as I mentioned earlier, maybe you're just buying that server to do a batch job, and that batch job is only running for 4 hours on Friday night. That's going to be a lot less in price. You're probably only going to pay $2 or $3 just to run that server for those particular hours. And the good thing about this is because it's consumption-based billing, you're not paying for the whole $55 for the month. You're only paying that $3 or $4 or $5 just to run that server to do that batch job. We kind of priced out an Azure quote, and again, things like this change, and we are staying very price competitive with some other vendors out there. But this would be an example right here of a server solution where a customer says, you know what, I want to have a virtual machine solution in the cloud. What's it going to take, and how much is it going to cost? In this case right here, what we've kind of built out is an installation where you have 2 application servers, 2 domain controllers, a virtual network to do site-to-site VPN. How much storage we might use if we're doing backup. And also one thing that I didn't mention is the fact that we don't charge to put data into Azure, but if you are pushing data out of it, there is egress traffic that you do need to consider. And again, so it's hard for me to say how much every single instance is going to cost, because you're probably going to have to use that calculator to give you your best fit and see how much that would be. But in this example right here, you're looking at the fact that the monthly cost for these 4 virtual machines running in the cloud, along with all the networking that goes along with it, would be about $531 to this particular company per month, and that's running, again, these virtual machines 24/7, right? So if those application servers only needed to be run, again, on Saturday evening, that monthly cost would be a lot lower there, and you can see that's what makes up the bulk of this particular quote. So what we do is, when you take that calculator, you figure out exactly how much that's going to cost, and you have a number of ways that you can purchase Microsoft Azure today. Now, this is how you can purchase Azure today, and this is going to be how you can purchase Azure going forward. What I'm going to show you in just a second is what we're going to be able to do through distribution, but I wanted to point this out first just so you know that there are some options out there depending on what your customer needs. So in this case right here, what you saw was the pay-as-you-go prices. There's 0 upfront cost. You can cancel at any time. There's no long-term commitment. You basically pay what the calculator says you have to pay. We also have some opportunities if you purchase directly through Microsoft Azure today, the ability to do 6 or 12-month commitments where you can save up to 32% depending on how much you plan to pay every single month. So here you can see that if I plan to pay an average of $500 per month for 6 months, I'm going to be able to get a discount of 20% on my Azure services. If you are a customer, or if you are thinking about customers that are going to use Azure big time, and you're thinking about a very huge installation, there are some other agreements out there that can also be purchased in the form of an EA. So let me bring this over here now to what's coming on August 1st. You may see a priceless preview on July 1st. Hopefully Tech Data will be able to have some better idea of the pricing at that time. So that's only about 5 days away. So just hold on for that before you start calling Tech Data just yet. But there is going to be a new way of purchasing Azure through Open, and that's going to be good for you, because if you are purchasing Open today, you kind of know how signing and creating an Open agreement works. You know about the Microsoft Volume Licensing Service Center and how that works. Azure is going to be purchased in very much the same way. And with Azure, what you're going to be able to do is purchase tokens in amounts of $100 that you can use towards any Azure service. So once you purchase that token for $100 and you input that into the Microsoft Azure portal, you will have 12 months to use that $100 worth of service applicable towards any Azure service. So anything that I talked about, like the backup, like the egress of network traffic, of the virtual machines, you're just going to be using it up towards the $100 increments that you're going to buy of the Azure service. So again, in the devil's in the details right here, it is a one monetary commitment SKU. So when you look for Azure through Open, you're only going to see one SKU per program, meaning you may see one through Open Licensing, through Open Value, and maybe through Open Value Subscription. I have not actually seen the price list yet to determine what the actual SKU numbers are going to be, but customers can purchase additional credit for Azure at any time. So you can decide how you want to sell Azure through Open to your customers. Maybe you want to do it monthly and create a new agreement, or buy new tokens every single month. Perhaps you want to feel them out and say, look, let's buy what we think it's going to be in the calculator for 6 months and then see where we're at after a couple of months to see how much more we need to purchase after those next 6 months. This is available to customers in countries that are that have open volume licensing. So I don't think you're going to have a very much issue finding an Azure Open agreement that will be applicable to customers in most countries across the globe if you need it. So just to give you a kind of a look at what the portal is going to be like, when you set up Azure and Open for your customers, what's going to happen here is that they are going to, you and are going to help them complete the verification process, and you're going to get to a page where you have the ability to redeem your Azure tokens that you've purchased directly from Tech Data. Once you do that, you put those tokens in, you'll now see that you have the ability to have availability to pay for whatever Azure services that you want to use. So I kind of liken this to, and I did this with the Tech Data team the other day, is talk about this Azure portal kind of as a gas tank for a car, right? When you think about that gas tank for a car, you don't know exactly how much in the beginning. I mean, you don't know how much you're going to be driving, for that first month when you buy that brand new car. You don't know your average miles per gallon just yet. But you know what? What you do is you go in and you fill up your tank and you drive at the speed that you want. Maybe you've got a lead foot one day and you're using, for example, Azure very heavily that day, or maybe you'll take it easy and you'll just cruise and not use as much Azure in that gas tank as you might for that particular week or month. And so that's kind of how Azure and Open is going to work. So you're going to buy that Azure portal and you're going to fill up that Azure portal gas tank with a bunch of Azure tokens, and as you spin up those virtual machines or turn them on or turn them off, that's going to use up the Azure token credit. And once you are empty, guess what? You're no longer going to be able to use Azure. So what do you do at that point? You either buy more Azure tokens, or if it's an emergency situation, you can put down a credit card so that they can make sure they're running. Because if they run out of credit, or if they run out of Azure dollars, I guess you could say, the Azure site or the Azure access is no longer functions. Your data doesn't get lost, so don't worry about that. But you do not, for example, if you're hosting an Azure website, that website will not be able to function until you make sure that you continue paying for it. So the way that this works is, like I said, during the activation process, I mentioned that you're going to have to input the information for that Azure token. The way this works is very similar to Office 365 Open today. If you know from Office 365 Open, if you've ever sold it, what you would do is you would create an agreement and you would go to the Volume Licensing Service Center, and within that Volume Licensing Service Center, you would see a 5x5 key, so one of those random number generated type keys. That's the key that you would use during the activation step that I just mentioned, in step 2. So that's kind of Azure and Open in a nutshell. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them inside the chat window that you might see inside of Link. If you can get access to that, please feel free to type them in, and I will also accept some verbal questions here. I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to finish these last couple of slides right here to tell you how you can get started today. If you are a Microsoft partner and you have a competency, or you're a Microsoft partner and you have the Action Pack, you have the ability to get Azure credits so that you can play around with Azure yourself to see how it works, and we're giving you $100. And $100 is actually enough to run a couple of small virtual machines and test some of the capabilities that Azure actually has to offer. As you get more and more competencies, you can also you'll be able to avail yourself of more access. There's Azure scenarios that you can play around with, learn how to create virtual machines, so some training that you can see over up there, and there's the ability to add customer subtenants to your account if you already have one, so you can play around with how that might work for a particular customer. And we've also got some go-to-market programs that are available for you to take advantage of. So please grab a hold of this deck. We'll be sending it out also, but if you are wanting to get this deck right now, if you're using Link and you're not familiar with Link, you're going to see on the bottom of your screen a little icon that looks like a computer screen. If you click on that computer monitor right there, you're going to see a button that then says Manage Presentable Content. When you click on that Manage Presentable Content button, you will see that you have a new screen that pops up, and under there it'll say More. Click on More, and then you can save as, and then save the presentation directly to your desktop. So I'm getting a question from Garrett asking, when will Azure Backup be available in the Midwest or Central? I would need to take a look at the Azure portal itself. I mean, I know that we have some East and West. I can't recall exactly whether or not, Garrett, what we had available specifically for Central and Midwest, but I haven't seen anything necessarily telling me that there's a specific roadmap for that, so I can't answer that at this time. But if you'd like to email me offline, I can find out for you if I've heard anything else. I'm going to type in my email address directly into the chat window right now. So josephan@microsoft.com. I'm also going to give you the address of your system engineer at Tech Data who can help you through those types of questions too. All right, so what's really important, I've just given you kind of a snippet of what's happening through Register for Azure and Open licensing, but there is going to be a ramp-up virtual event on July 9th. If you go to this link right here, this is where you're going to find out much more than what I've shown you today, and I kind of wish that we had this presentation after July 9th so I could give you even more information, but since we wanted to make sure that we got you on the cusp of what's coming out and also let you know that this event is coming up on July 9th, please attend this. It's only going to be for, I think it's probably about an hour-long event, but it'll give you more information on open licensing. All right, so David, yeah, sorry to be that guy. Yeah, we did suffer an outage for Office 365, yesterday. I know that it didn't affect everyone across the country, but it was something that we have addressed, and that we because of the amount of data that was flowing, everything should be back to normal now, but it did cause some grief for some of our customers. Again, this is although this may have been an outage, or this may have been something that did happen, we stand by our SLA. So if your customer was affected by this, and it did prove to be a loss of business for them, Microsoft does take our SLA, and it is a monetarily backed SLA, very carefully. So please reach out to your account manager or to someone at Tech Data if your customer did run into this, and we can help address those types of issues that did happen. So the last thing I did want to show you here is that we do have our system engineers who can help through this on-ramp into Azure. We've got John as well as Christian. They can be reached at 1-800-237-8931, and then the Microsoft extension specifically is 82031, option number 2. They can also be reached at SEMSFTBO at techdata.com. So again, thank you for joining this presentation today. We've recorded it. I've also handed out the presentation through link right now if you can get access to it. We'll also send it out to all the attendees on the call once we have the opportunity to get that uploaded into Tech Data. All right, folks, thank you very much, and thank you for the half an hour you spent with me on the phone. Have a great rest of the week.